As Alan said, I'm Ricardo Baca. I'm thrilled to be back for my fourth New West. Always great to be in the Bay in the fall, and especially jazzed about hanging out with these gentlemen. As Alan said, this panel is about creation. It features two wildly different and yet similar creators. We're here to talk about change. Change is scary, change is exhilarating, and change is also just necessary. I think about one of my former colleagues, and I remember her coming to me years ago and just telling me, one thing you need to know about me. It was like 2-3 weeks in on the job. She's like, I just need you to know that I am not good with change. And I was like, all right, well, we're going to work on that because it's inevitable and that's the direction we're going. And so we're going to talk a lot about that today. Really briefly, my name is Ricardo Baca. I had nothing to do with cannabis. I didn't even consume it up until 2013. That was the year that the editor of the Denver Post appointed me as the newspaper's first ever marijuana editor, and I covered implementation out there in Colorado, Washington, Alaska, reported on implementation down in Uruguay, and went out to Morocco, and have been still writing, but more recently, I run a PR agency called Grasslands, and we work with a lot of cannabis and hemp businesses. Very, very excited to be here with you guys, so thanks for having us. I am going to get started by passing the mic to Paul to my left. Paul is better known as DJ Spooky, and I'm really going to let them handle a majority of their introductions because I think that's always way more interesting. So, Paul, why don't you get us started before we kick it over to Melek?
All right. First and foremost, it's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I love innovation. So I'm always intrigued to see how how people can disrupt the norms of whatever systems are in play. So Ricardo, it's a pleasure to meet. Melek, it's been a pleasure to meet as well. I'm an electronic music producer, and I work with artists like Yoko Ono, or produce with bands like Sonic Youth, or hip hop artists like Killer Priest from Wu-Tang, RZA from Wu-Tang, stuff like that. On the other end of the spectrum, I also am deeply involved with thinking about the conceptual issues around technology. So, for example, I publish with MIT Press, which is one of America's leading technology universities. So, for me at least, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and it was always a paradoxical city. I grew up near DuPont Circle. I don't know if anybody knows that area, Connecticut and R. And there was a lot of family-owned businesses, and my family owned a business that was fascinatingly tied with design. And my mom was a historian of design, and my father was dean of Howard University's law school. So I kind of grew up in a household that celebrated information. So amusingly enough, our mayor got put in jail for smoking crack. I don't know if anybody remembers this one. Mayor Marion Barry. So we were talking about this earlier today, and it was shocking back in the day. And there was this, Ronald Reagan was in the White House, and Mayor Marion Barry was smoking crack. So what a wild time. And so today what we're going to riff on is, I think a lot of the issues, Ricardo, we were talking about this backstage, is about the kind of need for innovation and design. Here we are in 2019, and actually there's a huge fire north of your city. There, you can smell the smoke if you're outside today. There were fighter airplanes flying over downtown San Francisco for some crazy reason all afternoon. What's that? Oh, Fleetweek, okay. Well, these jets are flying really low and really fast. They're getting ready for strafing runs over Iraq or something, I don't know. But it was really a surreal morning. Of course, now we're moving towards impeaching President Trump, which I would love to see that. So for me at least, DJ culture and, of course, cannabis have been intimately linked for many years. I come out of a Jamaican tradition of dance hall and hip hop. So if you think about the paradoxes of our moment, here we are in 2019, and many of the earlier people, who were predominantly people of color, had been penalized for selling small amounts of weed or whatever substance. And I'm a big believer in decriminalization and restorative justice. So what I want to riff on today is thinking about how we can innovate, but also create new paths for entrepreneurship and people to feel like they're stakeholders in change. So I wanted to play you guys a quick example of a project that, before you just, this is kind of from the first car that Henry Ford made, was made from hemp, actually. And it was 1893 through about 1896. And it's a Model T Ford car. And it was made from hemp cellulose fiber. and ran on hemp biofuel. And amusingly enough, a lot of the first cars were electric cars as well. So we actually are in a paradoxical moment where we've had a century of carbon production, we've had a century of fossil fuels, but it could have been a very different path. So too with many of the things around us, the building architecture codes, things like that. So I want to just leave this in the air. Hemp, for example, pulls a tremendous amount of carbon out of the air, and people are right now saying that we need to plant a lot more trees. But if you start to think about it, if we plant more hemp and we plant other kinds of kind of diversifying of an ecosystem, we can actually have a much more climate-oriented approach to many of the issues that we'll probably be talking about later today. So I just want to play this quick clip. It's the first car made from hemp, and you'll see it was actually 10 times stronger than steel and lighter and much more composite material. Really interesting. So if we can just play that. And probably going to do a little volume on there. Yep, that's the car.
Amongst the thousands of products made from hemp, one of the most extraordinary is Henry Ford's plastic car. Built in 1941, it contained cellulose fibers derived from hemp, sisal, and wheat straw. The plastic was lighter than steel, yet could withstand 10 times the impact without denting.
So that's pretty wild. Because here we are, that was 1941, but his actual first Model T Ford was made from hemp. And again, composite materials, lighter, stronger than steel. Same with bamboo, actually. Bamboo is stronger than steel. And if you're ever in Asia, I go to Singapore, Hong Kong, other spots, you'll see an entire skyscraper with bamboo. And actually, amusingly enough, bamboo is also a very carbon negative plant, pulls a tremendous amount of carbon out of the air. So there's a lot of room for innovation, not just thinking about materials, but changing the ideas that we have to think about these kinds of new materials as they impact on our society. And I'd say we're in a crisis right now that's distinctly about the fossil fuel economy. And as an artist, I always really want to be very clear that I'm an environmentalist, and I think it's incredibly important to innovate, to get people to think about restorative justice. And with that said, thanks, and I'll just pass the mic to Melek.
Right on. Melek, go ahead.
How's everyone? All right. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. My mayor has never smoked crack, so I don't know how.
That you know of.
Say it again.
That you know of.
I'm pretty certain.
I think all mayors smoke crack. Yeah, Ford, right? Tom Ford. Rob Ford. Tom Ford. Right, fashion.
So I'd like to tell you how I came into this space, even to this very seat. My older brother, I think everybody kind of thinks, if you're black, you think this, that their older brother has superpowers. So my older brother really had superpowers. He was Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan. And so long story short, later in life, we discovered that he had like a scar on his brain, and it was about 1 inch long, and so he began to have these serious seizures. So I set off on a quest. I'm a comic book fan, so I took this on as a superhero-like type thing to find this magical oil that I knew was in California to heal my brother. So I found my way into the Emerald Triangle, all right? And so while there, I discovered, like this is, if you've ever been, it's an amazing journey. So being from the South, I'm looking at this, and it's like everybody from the mayor down grows weed, and you smell it before you get there. So I know this is no secret for you all, but it was a big thing for me. Like it was like the search for the Holy Grail for me. So finding this oil, I gave it to my older brother, and literally, he always smoked weed all his life, right? But from the day that he took this oil, he never had seizures again. So at that point, because I am a businessman also, and since I was there, so I said, you know what, this would be a heck of an investment, So I began the process of buying and selling, okay? And it didn't take me long to realize that I was in the game and my white counterparts were in business. I was selling weed and they were selling a high level concept called cannabis. And I said, so clearly if we're doing the same thing but it's not viewed the same thing, I'm not gonna make the cover of a magazine for doing what I'm doing. And I don't look good in orange, county orange. So at that point, that's where the concept of ReUP was born, because I knew that that there was more Meleks out there. You know, I know it is, as a matter of fact, who were doing the same thing and would take that same route. And I've always been the kind of person, I don't like an unfair fight. You know, that's just not who I am. I'm not programmed that way. So that's the origins of ReUP. So I sat still and I thought about it. You know, I didn't want to be the thinking man's drug dealer, and so I figured out a way, you know, by using, and this is what ReUP does and what ReUP is. We're an emerging privately held management company. And what we'll do is we'll effectively use the private offering exemptions of the Jobs Act to raise capital in an effort to be a cannabis management company that is collectively owned by black people. Now, the reason why I say black like that, because the reason is because the concept of people of color, it obscures when we need to be specific. I notice a lot of conversations. There's something about the whole thing of when you say black, you know, it's kind of hiding what the reaction to that concept, whether it's fear or it's apathy. While I understand, and I would understand the concept of all people of color lives matter, it wouldn't do justice to the specifics of what's actually happening. So with ReUP, we center blackness in the concept so that we are actually building something that is very, very clearly communicated, and we're transparent in what we're looking to do. Because when we look at the statistics, it's very clear that the legalization movement, I would have thought, where are we at, 33 states now? Something like that. 33 states, I would have thought that there would have been some cool white guy at, what is it, it's 50 states, right? At state 25, somebody should have said, oh, wait a minute, we've left them out again. But it didn't happen. So at 33, it's clear to me that that's just the way things roll. So that's why it's so important, you know, when I talk about, you know, what ReUP does and what ReUP's about, it's about centering blackness in the conversation in its right way. And however you feel about it, just get over it so we can really have a real conversation. All right?
Well, that's what we're here to do. Melek, a quick follow-up. I mean, what reaction do you tend to get from people of all ethnicities, given that you are focusing on this concept and construct of blackness?
From all ethnicities? I don't know. Let's see. So what happens to you when oh, okay, so you're good. Well, let's pick someone else. No. The reaction is the reaction to any and everything black. That's just what it is. I mean, it's like my experience in Humboldt. You know, there were black people in Humboldt who didn't want to make eye contact because they didn't want to mess up their connect in Humboldt. So it happens that way, and I'm just not afraid to say it. I'm from a very black city. And we're aware that we're black in Atlanta, and so it's so common. I remember coming out west that I was like, wow, black people aren't just everywhere, are they? You know, so the reactions vary. It's diverse, and I think it's the future. The diversification of the faces who own cannabis is what's going to make it $1 trillion business.
And of course, you know, this is such a bizarre space because, you know, in a lot of these state marketplaces, this is a highly regulated industry. So you have entities like DORA governing this, but one of the things we encountered as journalists in Colorado, as we were going to the Marijuana Enforcement Division, which is within the Department of Revenue there, we wanted to find out how many people of color actually owned cannabis businesses in Colorado. They weren't collecting that data. How many women own or manage businesses, license holding cannabis businesses in Colorado? They weren't collecting that data either. So it's problematic, and I'm sure those varied reactions are part of the reason that you are doing ReUP.
Exactly.
Paul, we kind of got a little bit of Melek's personal cannabis history, but you're here speaking at a cannabis business and technology event. Can we get a little bit of your history besides producing Wu-Tang records? Because obviously there's got to be some good stories there, as well as hanging out with Thurston and Kim of Sonic Youth.
Yeah, Thurston, his email is like Thurstoned. If anyone likes Sonic Youth, that now you know why. But for me, at least, the whole issue around many of the issues that Melek has been talking about is we have to really kind of do a bird's eye view of the economics and power structures in place. And if you see when industries change, societies change. And if you look at the Industrial Revolution, if you look at the 1960s information and technology, we're now in what many people are calling the attention economy. So we're moving away from the production of physical goods. And in New York, it's heartbreaking because we see more homeless people than at the peak of the Great Depression. And we're actually going through a huge, what they call retail apocalypse, where there's so many empty storefronts if you walk along Broadway or Fifth Avenue. So you can easily see that the digital economy is radically changing the physical economy. But one of the things that remains is people will probably still be consuming whatever substances make their day a little better. For me, at least, I never really got into, I'm not really a consumer. I'm not against it. One puff makes me go to sleep, and occasionally it's a great aphrodisiac, just saying. But generally, I'm a big fan of thinking about the economics of things. So music for me was, I was never really planning on doing music. I went to Bowdoin College in Maine, and I majored in macroeconomics and then switched over to philosophy and French literature, and then did a series of degrees in Switzerland and other places. So, but I kept noticing, of course, when one DJs, people smoke mad weed and party. So that's the gray market area of this economy, of course. And when people come to an event, that kind of responsible use of substances, and I've DJed places like Burning Man, I've DJed Bonnaroo, all sorts of festivals. And I've tended to find that the economics that Melek was talking about gets re-scripted into club culture in a lot of different ways. And what I'm fascinated with right now is we are at a pivot point in the culture, where precisely because we've reached that tipping point of 33 states. But then I look at Canada, and because Canada really had a very distinctly pro-cannabis approach to policy, they're outstripping America at many levels right now. So we really can see some of the legacy of course, of oppression and other issues that go into the American policy matrix. Of course, Jeff Sessions was a lunatic, and these things keep coming up. It's like incredible. You'd think we'd wake up one morning and they'd say, oh, this is business and it's an entire industry and people can actually get taxes, and pharmaceutical industry is even joining forces on some of this stuff, and the opioid epidemic is a nightmare and it's killing tens of thousands of people. But they'll still just keep going down that because they own the senators, they own the congressmen, and so on. So my own just sort of journey has always been looking at how can we innovate in a way that is about evolution and getting people to rethink some of the political and economic structures around us that we can make better. And like you wake up in the morning, and if you're in an urban metropolitan area. The prison industrial system is based basically on putting brown people and people of color and lower income people in prison because that's how they make money. And it costs more money to send someone to jail than it does to send them to Harvard. So there's a tremendous amount of leeway we have here. And I think with this kind of gathering of creative and innovative people, that's where we can look at some of these portals like Melek is doing, which to me is really fascinating. In fact, I want to rap with you about maybe you should open a store in New York, actually. Pop-up. There we go. Because there's a lot of empty space right now. So these are things that I just want to put out there as like, kind of provocations over the discussion. And I'm really fascinated with, as a DJ, I never really have worked a normal 9 to 5. I mean, I graduated from college and I started throwing parties and I charged $5 at the door. And this is in the ancient 90s, and then now you charge $75, $100 at the door. But back then, it was just to pay the rent. You threw 1 or 2 parties for that month, and you could pay your rent. Like for example, recently, again a heartbreaking situation. I did a benefit for a ghost ship, which was happened in Oakland. and a whole bunch of DJs gathered to help them get back on their feet after this fire. So I'm a big fan of that grassroots organizing and opening new doors between communities. I'm very Manhattan. Obviously, Oakland's halfway across the country, fully across the country. And just supporting across different regions is really important to me. So that's kind of my beginning of the conversation.
We had we have a similar space to Ghost Ship in Colorado. It's in Denver. It's called Rhinoceropolis, and they did not have the tragedy that occurred at Ghost Ship, but they had some hard times, and it was great to see creative class, West Coast, East Coast, Western United States really step in. I love that you're coming out from New York to help them find their footing again. When Rhinoceropolis in Colorado was struggling, the Meow Wolf team really stepped up from Santa Fe and came up to Denver and represented for them, made some very headline-grabbing donations, which was huge. But, I also want to take advantage of the fact that we are here in California. And Melek, you were talking earlier about your history out here, very personal. We're almost 2 years into the regulated adult use market. I want each of your feedback on how you think it's going so far. Maybe why don't we start with some of the good? But Melek, what are your thoughts about some of the good of Amendment Proposition 64 out here?
Some of the good. I'm not as optimistic as perhaps you are. I think that, to me, California looks like, this when you watch the sci-fi movies in the future, that black people are never there. That's what I feel is happening here, and it's happening all over. In Colorado also. It's like I'm not on that spaceship, so that's what it looks like out here. So I feel that it's becoming what everything always becomes, is just another segregation story, and that's just keeping it real with you. That I don't know. I think that a hand is being forced that is going to be scary based upon the way it sounds. It'll be more scarier than in what it actually is. And what I mean by that is that you're going to hear, black people take a real serious stand, and it's gonna sound scary because you've been white all your lives, and it's gonna sound like it's a threat to that. But all it's natural progression. It's just what has to happen, because people are gonna figure it out. They're gonna realize what their influence has been on the product, and you're gonna have to, watch what takes place. You see it all over. Let's put it this way. If you really do your history right, even when you look at the concept of, what was it, like the numbers game in New York, it was a black thing. It was a black thing. And then it became, the whole gambling houses, they ultimately became, when license came into play, it became a thing where mass arrest took place. And then you were prohibited. The barrier to entry was the license. And then Las Vegas popped up. When you look at, again, in Harlem, with running the numbers, a license came into play, mass arrest, and then, state lottery popped up. And so I happen to know, and again, this is the Keep It Real session too. So
100.
Keeping it 100 session. 80% of the marijuana that grew in California left California. And the reality is that through sophisticated networks called UPS and the post office, this is how the weed left California and was in the hood, in the streets. And a large amount of that, because it was relegated to such a negative thing, it was black people who had their hands on it. If we flip the numbers, right? If we flip the numbers and look at it, if you're nationwide, I think it's at 5 times, if you're black and you're male, you're 5 times likely to be arrested with marijuana, all right? Then you know what that really means? We got weed. That's what it really means. If right now the 6 black people in this room, if you frisk us and we got, that's not discrimination. We got weed. And so I'm saying that to say, we've had that weed. And so this is another thing that's taking place. So the legalization movement, because technically, let's look at what prohibition really is, all right? This is not the Wikipedia version I'm about to give you. Prohibition really is a thing where something that is colloquially legal is about to be made illegal for the purpose of repurposing the benefactors of its legalization, all right? Don't ask me to repeat that because I couldn't say it that way. But that's what prohibition is. And the reality is the first prohibition that took place in this country was black bodies. That's what took place first. And so this is no different than this whole thing shaping up. So the reason I say that is that, about the thing that's going to happen, the future is going to be, we're not going to wait to see if we're going to be on Star Trek. Spider-Man is black now. I mean, what? So what's going to happen is that we're going to do what has to be done, and this whole concept, we're going to diversify diversification. And then when you see that it's not as violent as you would have thought it would have been, then we'll interact in a cool way. And I think that it'll be a beautiful future. And I think it's the fear of all that coming into place that is the thing. But in closing, that it's just necessary that the people in this room understand how to reinvent themselves. I don't know what level you operate on. I don't believe in the above ground drug economy per se. I don't think that the underground, and I don't call it the black market for obvious reasons, as much as I love saying black, but I don't call it the black market. I feel that the underground market should just come to the middle. And I think what is called the above ground should come to the middle also, because that's where humanity is. And then we can act civil about this instead of it becoming a thing like big tobacco and all that other stuff. But again, I'm not optimistic that that's going to happen. So what's going to happen is that people are going to, those who wake up are going to do what people who wake up do. So that's how
I want to chime in for a second too, because what's a powerful thing here is that my motto these days is that the Stone Age didn't end for lack of stone. There was plenty of stone around, and there still is. It ended because people had better ideas. And we need to really use the opportunity that legalizing and moving into this regulated space offers. And I would probably agree with Melek about 100% that it's about innovation. And so when people are given opportunity, they really either have to seize that opportunity or make that opportunity. And growing up in Washington, D.C., which is a predominantly black city, it was always fascinating to see, like the current mayor was the first woman, African-American woman to be the mayor, Mayor Bowser. And one of her first acts was to plant as many trees as possible, because I don't know if anybody's been in D.C. in the summer. It's blazing hot and you're walking through like basically soup. And the trees already have like really helped with just cleaning the air and other things. So quality of living, economics, all of those things are factors that I think Melek is talking about. What could actually help supercharge that is critical thinking. And I think that that's something that we all can probably agree on. America really could use across the spectrum, whatever race, class, or your social hierarchy. So here we are in a room filled with probably people who are entrepreneurs and innovators. And I want to just say that how we give ourselves these tools to rethink what's going on is what the takeaway is. I'm not an entrepreneur in that sense. I'm an entrepreneur in music and in tech and software. So I've developed like an iPad app where we had about 15 million downloads, and it was free. And then we did in-app purchases and other things that allowed it to have a different business model. Free software. I'm really into what you call open source issues and net neutrality. More that's on the digital side of things. So there's a great book by Lewis Hyde called The Gift, and it's about when you make things free. And the gift economy is one of those kind of my favorite themes for this kind of situation. But you're right. I mean, these are very dark and cynical times. I would be on that spaceship, by the way, though. I'm post Wakanda / Black Panther. you know, it's definitely there's a movement called Afrofuturism that a lot of people have been checking out. In fact, I'm curating a big exhibition of it with a team at the Oakland Museum coming up about African American science fiction. So, I'd love to. That opens in spring. So, yeah.
By the way, I'd like to be on that ship. Don't. Let's not mistake it. I'm just understanding that it's most likely that I'll be, looking at that ship go there. So I'll create my own ship. That's it.
There we go.
And you're welcome to fly with me.
We can do the P-Funk
right,
update.
Right, I'll bring that P-Funk back.
It's the P-Funk update. So yeah, so just I'm an optimist, but I actually think that human beings sway towards the good. I mean, there's so many issues that the ruling classes of whatever race or class or country you're in. I've DJed all over the world: Angola, Sudan. I'm going to be going to Abu Dhabi from here in a little bit, and I'm always intrigued to see. Class and social hierarchy re-scripted because the American racial model, especially as it is in business, it really gets distorted and bizarre as you go to other countries. And I spent a lot of time in Korea, Japan, China, and so on. But yeah.
Can I jump in right
Yeah.
there? Because he's in music, and also, I do want to do a little rap diss back, at that what you're saying there. In all my travels. And I've been, I think, to most of those same places, right? Everywhere I go, black people are on the bottom. It's just the reality, and I'm a National Geographic child, so I see it there too. And it's the way to create a vulnerable group of people and exploit them. So the reality of my question with Let's ReUP is that, when is enough? And I know that it's inevitable. That I think Victor Hugo said it, that you can't, you can't. Now I'm quoting it and not quoting it at the same time, but there's nothing, you can't stop an idea whose time has come. And so the reality is all of us have to work inside of that idea, and I'll use that, that phrase, that overworked phrase, that we can be on the wrong side or the right side of history. And so it's rooms like this. This is why I'm grateful for, for Kat for inviting me up, and you guys too, so that we can have these kind of conversations, because I think we take the edge off of the thing when we can talk about it. And everybody likes to not be those people who create the bad stuff in the world. Well, I don't think the people who messed up the world are going to fix the world. I think they need to be kept out of the room and not even be able to see the blueprint. And it's necessary for each one of us to check ourselves, to see, just how we contribute to that. Because this stuff isn't a mistake, like you mentioned, environmental. It wasn't an uneducated man that created the aerosol pellet. That's not a not smart person. The person who split an atom, that's a highly decorated person. So, these experts and these authorities, if you let them loose, they will do what they've always done. I mean, because think about it. Jamaicans didn't melt the polar ice caps. This is another group of people who have the ability to do so. So this industry that we're in is going to look like every other industry, except somewhere, somehow, somebody takes a position and is serious about, redistributing the power. And I think that it can happen when groups amongst themselves encourage other individuals to join in, and we do something about that. So in that, I agree with you. I'm just not waiting on that to happen.
No, neither would I. I definitely think the eerie moment of 2019, you wake up this morning and there's a fire blazing in the hillside, and the power company have to turn off the electricity for all these people in California. And if you've walked around outside, you can smell the burning in the air, which, again, it's hard to argue with a storm that just smashed your house. That it's a pan-humanist issue. But the people who have contributed to the least to fossil fuel economy are going to be hammered the most by it, which is going to be the global South, which is going to be the American South, and so on and so on. So, yeah, everyone is affected. So these are issues that I think climate change is, that's one of my main themes, so I always sort of default to that. But I'm always intrigued to see how we can push the envelope on thinking, which is, I'm a big fan of, we met earlier today, we were talking about just some of these issues. And I'm really thinking that the hemp industry has an opportunity to transform some of the economy, because right now most of the stuff is not working. The average living wage for someone is not available. Most people in New York, like I said, we had the highest level of homelessness since the Great Depression. And so this is like not even a hidden recession right now, because the economy is going to be hammered even more as artificial intelligence, deep neural networks, other things radically transform the everyday work process, the gig economy, all sorts of stuff that people are, there's like, in fact, the credit card, as we all think about it, is basically an extension of sharecropping. If you go back to the post-Civil War, 40 acres and a mule and so on. It's eerie to see most people, especially students, which are, again, heartbreaking stuff, they can't get out of the cycle of debt. And that's this very specifically bank policies and other issues. So the economy that you guys are creating is kind of a side dimension right now to most of that. And it can move in a lot of different directions, depending on willpower, innovation, and so on. So it's very new, and it's really interesting to see how that's affecting this kind of situation.
Well, and I love that we're talking about some really big picture issues. I would love to pull us back a little bit to these industries. Of course, hemp belongs in this conversation about cannabis as much as THC marijuana does. But, would you guys have one or two pieces of advice for the entrepreneurs and the leaders in this room on things that they can do to make this system more equitable, more progressive, more headed in the right direction? Because as each of you have pointed out, this industry is unfortunately as male, as white as other industries are. And, we're less than 6 years into regulated adult use cannabis. I think the altruist in me wants to believe that we can still make this a better industry, right? I want to believe that we can. Is it too late? And what are some of those thoughts that you have on how we can make this better? Melek, why don't we start with you?
I don't think it's going to get better. I don't think it's going to get better, because what has gotten better? What gets better when it starts off white and male? It doesn't get better. It just morphs and becomes something else. You go from slavery to convict leasing, but you still got chains on you some kind of way.
But you're trying to make it better. ReUP is specifically an effort that could make this industry better.
It's the it that I want to speak to. I'm not trying to make it better. I'm going to make me better. I'm going to make people who look like me better and be encouraged to be better. All right? And then you will have to deal with my most better self. And then the reaction of me at my highest self is what you have to judge yourself by. That makes sense? Because I'm a little confused after saying that. But I think y'all understand what I'm saying. So that's what's going to happen. It's not going to happen the other way around, because nothing has happened that way. It's not going to happen that way. You can kill a black man in his own apartment and the judge will hug you. It's not going to get better.
That was a black judge, too.
You see? So that's how deep this thing is. I don't believe in the concept of white supremacy. I believe the great investment was in black inferiority. And so as a result of that, then the byproduct is this illusion of supremacy. So it's a deeper conversation about just how committed people are into being supreme. And I mean, that's an attractive thing. But when it's not grounded in any kind of real reality, that's when it's delusional. So I would have to be crazy to expect crazy to become sane. So my position is that, operating at my highest self, my most free self, and operating inside of the free enterprise of my free self, then you get the opportunity to see yourself and then function accordingly. And I think that's where this harmony will take place, or the disharmony will actually become a dinosaur.
But all that said, you're saying it is not going to become better, but you are speaking to 40 or 50 industry leaders in this specific industry, and would you want to leave them with a takeaway that you would hope they would leave here with and maybe take to heart and maybe put into action?
I would hope that what I'm saying, causes you to, and just for clarity, then the industry leaders, the individuals who are black in the audience already understand. It's just the thing that we have, this telepathy, right, from being from Wakanda. Um, but white people in the audience, I would just simply say, be people who happen to be white, and then we'll connect at the level of just being people, because the industry is just a reflection of the people who are in it. That's just what it is. And so when the people make that transition, the industry will too. I enter everybody in the Humboldt that I was purchasing from were white guys, and we had cool relationships as long as I was, buying. We never tested it beyond some of that. But then I walked away with some great, friendships that I still maintain to this day. So that's in proportion what we're dealing with. And so I would just hope that, those of you in the audience, use this opportunity of these kind of conversations, engage them, and get comfortable with what the future is going to be.
I appreciate that. The thinking that the industry is reflective of who is in it. And, for example, when Melek and I were touching base last week, he said, hey, I was just in Denver, just hanging out, came out to talk to some African-American entrepreneurs. And I was like, oh, okay, so you hooked up with Wanda and Scott, right? And unfortunately,
all two of them.
it is tragic. I come from a very, very white state. Very healthy, robust Latino population as well, but unfortunately, that is what the cannabis industry looks like in Colorado. But Paul, what's the takeaway you'd like to encourage, that you'd like to leave people with?
All right. First and foremost, on a human note, I'm loving this conversation. Melek, I want to definitely rap with you about New York, and Ricardo. I'm actually buying a spot in Colorado, so I'll definitely check in with you. So Boulder-ish.
That's where he's building that spaceship.
Yeah, well,
I'm into it.
But okay, so just from my take on what Melek is talking about, and from an industry point of view, study after study, I could, if anyone wants to get deep and technical, I can post it on my website and so on, has shown that the more diverse your workforce is, and the better you align those different perspectives and moving parts, you actually have a more robust company and a smarter situation where many corporations fall into what you call groupthink, and then their innovation dies. So you need to have a continuous reflection of innovation in your choice of people in your zone. So I'm a fan of that kind of perspective, and the math is clear. There's plenty of studies that show, sociologically speaking, a more diverse perspective in your own company, whatever that company is, actually makes your company more robust. So what could be made better in any industry, and this is across the American spectrum, is to actually facing the fact that the humanity of any project. When I do a project, first thing I ask, are there enough women? Have we made sure to have a balance of different perspectives? And so we probably have a different approach on that. But a lot of my team is Japanese, for example, because I DJ in Japan a decent amount. My management team is Japanese. I hire a lot of Germans because I'm in Berlin or in Frankfurt a decent amount. And also I rent a studio in Kingston, Jamaica every once in a while when I'm finishing an album. So, I keep my ear to the street for a lot of different styles, a lot of different ethnic groups, different styles of music, and so on and so on. So above and beyond that, it keeps my ear globally attuned. But at the same time, I think if you didn't do that in my field, you'd get wiped out because there's so many other people competing and trying to get in. So too probably with the hemp and THC and CBD industry. I'm just guessing. So, in fact, my takeaway from this conversation is actually I want to get involved. I want to figure some of this out. And as a musician, I know Snoop Dogg's been doing a lot of stuff, but I would probably have a little bit more of a tech approach, I'm going to guess. And probably, if you ask me the same question in 2020, I'm very interested in cryptocurrency. So my next album, I'm working with, for millennials, I have to say, there's a band called The Police. It's kind of one of those moments where the 20th century is in the rearview mirror, move further and further. So we're doing a side project because those guys were into reggae and rock, and so we're doing sort of an art rock thing. We've actually recorded a lot of in Colorado, come to think of it, just because it's quiet and relaxed, and I go hiking up in the mountains outside of Boulder. But for me, at least, the battle is deprogramming out of the 20th century's legacy of these kinds of annoying and basically just myopic perspectives on. I mean, when you heard Jeff Sessions say, "I don't like marijuana," and his policies then destroyed and wiped out what could have been a very burgeoning industry, and you saw Canada keep moving and further into the future. So the American, he represents that kind of mentality that I think Melek is talking about. But when I go to other countries and I see how, I'm using Canada as an example, but well, Mexico, regretfully, because of the narcotraficante and other kinds of gangster stuff, I mean, those guys have their own world. But on the other end of the spectrum, it is its own economy and industry and so on, regretfully, with a lot of murder, torture, and other things. But how can we strike a balance is by, first and foremost, giving people a feeling of being a stakeholder, and that means people have to take initiative too, and that means let's, kind of give people some better tools to critique the world around them. That's I think the best start, and this is my takeaway from this conference is I've already learned so much just from the conversations I've had today. Regretfully, I have a 7 a.m. flight out tomorrow, but Michael Franti's an old friend of mine. He's going to be talking. Killer Mike, who's going to be talking. These are all people who are doing very progressive stuff, and they'll be here over the next day or two. I regret I have a concert in New York tomorrow night. Otherwise, I would just be soaking up and learning from you guys all. So, yeah, thank you.
I appreciate you all. I don't know if we have time for a few questions, but we have some people raising their hands, so screw it. We're going to take a couple questions. Why don't we start with you in the front, please?
Yeah, I have a question. Do you have a comment on how San Francisco, Oakland, LA gives first chance to cannabis stores, connect with the candidate?
Well, my partner and I, we participated in the Oakland. Well, I did in the Oakland social equity program, when it was first kicking off, and then he and I participated in the LA social equity program. My thing is that it's become more of an expungement movement nationwide than an opportunity to create wealth. And so I'm still watching it. I'm still watching it to see what it becomes, and it's moving very slow. And as a result of it moving slow, it's not only giving first mover advantage, it's giving second, third, fourth, fifth mover advantage, to the well-funded, organizations. And then this strange thing where the larger well-funded companies are able to buy the license is just madness. Like I always refer to this movement as this is the crop that they won't share. And so as I'm watching it, that's what I'm seeing taking place.
Why isn't anybody speaking more with a stronger voice for the black people?
It's like any and everything else. This is just another segregation story. It's about money. It's always about money. We hear about this income wealth gap. America was created with this gap. The gap is what America is. If there was no gap, this would cease to be America. So again, all the economies that come forward out of it will always reflect the necessity of the gap. So there's always going to be a small amount of people. And so, to your point, this is what these conferences, have to be about. I'm not the designer of the conferences, but I'm glad that this portion exists, and maybe more of these type of conversations will be what the conferences are about, as opposed to individuals who are talking about, the different levels of what they do and those kind of things, because we've heard that all before, and you just change the product. We could take the signs down and say this is a soda pop conference, and it would still look the same, in the audience if this was even in your profession.
Might smell a little bit different.
Yeah, it may smell a little different. But even in your profession, just for the sake of it, there's questions. Even in your profession of DJing, the fact of touching a record and making a sound or mixing it is a black thing. But as you travel nationwide, you and 2 other DJs are black. That's just what happens. We should face it.
Well, and so much of the social equity conversation throughout the entire country really comes down to funding. It's been fascinating for all of us to watch what's happening in Massachusetts. I know Shalene is speaking here today, tomorrow, not sure, but she and her fellow colleagues on the board in Massachusetts are trying to figure out that funding question because this program exists. There's still a barrier to entry, and now Melek has a potential alternative. But one more question in the back, you, sir?
So I'm really curious, because I work with the nonprofit that creates opportunities for all races and colors, called the Digital Nest. What we found, what we do in Northern California, and Paul mentioned it earlier, which is about these networks of people. So we have employers that are committed to the cause. I personally think that I think that is the way to fix it. Together under a common umbrella where they're all trying to better themselves. Question. I love Atlanta. I love it. You guys comment on the role. Everything we're trying to accomplish.
Well, Atlanta's very interesting. We're dealing with what's called HB 324, and if I'm not mistaken, there was about 60 dispensaries and licenses that were available in the beginning, so you're aware of it. And then magically overnight, at 1 a.m., the governor stepped in, and there was no dispensaries. Is everyone seated? So what happened was this. Literally, all of the drugstores, pharmacies are the new dispensaries in Georgia. That's unprecedented. Nobody, and then now people are trying to figure out, so what is, Walgreens is in the business now? CVS, Walmart? And so they're still trying to figure it out. And then the 6 licenses that were given, 2 of them are for the big companies, and then 4 minor private companies. And then one of those bigger licenses, I think, one of the bigger ones is for Fort Valley. 2 colleges are growing. University of Georgia and then Fort Valley, which is an HBCU. So while I hear what you're saying, the problem it's already a problem. And that's what happens everywhere. So the reason why, as I opened up about the concept of the people of color obscuring the facts and the numbers, is because some of these programs were laser specific to impact a certain group of people who happen to be black. So when you create a program that's helping everyone, you're going to still keep the problem in the way that it is. And so you have to be specific, and it's okay to be specific. It's okay to have a program that is for black people. It's okay to have a program for women. It's okay to do that. It's okay to do that. And that's what's going to have to happen to fix it. So we welcome you to come to Atlanta, but I want you to know that the deck is already stacked because the law stacked the deck. And that's the situation, that the way we react to the law is going to be where inside of that the solution lies.
Is there any possibility of like a lawsuit or something structurally that you could do to attack that? Because I think a lot of lawyers would be all over that really quickly if you catalyzed a legal community or people to really, that seems very crazy, kind of a law situation. And I know in California, the governor here seems to be very progressive on some things and is doing interesting stuff to vacate sentences where people have been incarcerated for selling weed and so on. Even Kamala Harris, we spoke about that earlier. It was kind of heartbreaking to hear about that. But I would bet you, as a test case for the weed industry, a lot of people might support you to do a lawsuit against that or create a legal mechanism that fought that, because it sounds very bizarre.
Well, bizarre is what we're dealing with. Yeah.
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 No. Yeah.
It's clear. So. Bizarre is the
Yeah.
bizarre is the new normal.
Right.
So that's what we're dealing with. So, but again, I think that would distract us. So I wanted to say this before we close. So what we're doing is we've been traveling through the country to predominantly black populations because I've noticed that as legalization moves from the West, it started off recreational. Then as it gets to the places where there are strong black populations, it becomes medicinal. And for the purpose that if you're going to deal with a state, you need to have that experience with public health to deal with a state. So in these particular places, you got to keep in mind that the next best climate, from my point of view, to California in this country would be in the South where there's land. The key element to this whole movement is land. And there's still a lot of black people in the South who still own hundreds to thousands of acres. The Atlantic magazine just recently, I think it was last month, had an article out about the great land grab that's taking place in Mississippi. So this hemp program, there's an opportunity here. So we've been going to all of these particular places, and I call them chocolate cities, right? So if we could find 10 cities, and we're popular in 3 right now, Detroit, Atlanta, and Miami, and then we're working on Mississippi. So in 10 states, if we raised up 1,000 people that gave $5,000 each, we would have $50 million under the Reg A exemption. And then we would make our way as players we'd be our own social equity program. Because it's going to be about dollars and cents. And if there's no money, then it's not happening. You know, no romance without finance. It's just what it is.
Tell Trump that.
I'll pass.
Yeah.
Same. I want to thank everybody here
there was a woman,
so
actually,
very much.
Speaking of women, there was a woman who had her. Yeah, I really wanted to make sure the
Yeah,
women.
we got
uh-huh.
Well, I had a question for the both of you. I think a lot of the situations tell stories are not allowed to tell. So in terms of like hate black. For the past 4 years. The guy on the corner, he's like, look at us with that. Black people topless. Like, how can we
Or horribly disfigured in the above.
like how can we talk about all of our experiences past and then also in terms of Afrofuturism, in terms of a black perspective, white person's perspective, how we're going to fit into that. Like, what is really black?
I'll jump in first because I think there's a perfect opportunity for both. First of all, I don't think that it's a dystopian future, okay? It's just not going to look, the way that it's not going to look like what you see on TV, right? So the way I would answer that is that if you're honest, there's a zeitgeist taking place. You can see it all over. Everywhere you look, black is happening, and black is back. And because we're in the same space, we're around each other. What you thought about us, that we all can rap and we all play basketball and we're all DJs, and we all smoke weed. We all have weed. You're able to see that there's a little bit more. There's a lot more. But I think that comes from telling genuine, authentic black stories to whoever, to yourself first, and then to yourselves, then believing them. And then the onlookers actually tie into the authenticity of that, because rap is the example. That's why I wanted to segue. For music is the example. You know, Jay-Z told authentic stories. The individual who really got shot, who rapped about being shot, you believed it. And then there's other stories that's just not shoot 'em up and whatever. But those authentic stories are being appreciated at another level. And so you look at the guy, Lil Nas, with the old country road that my daughters sing and whatever, that I've had to sing as a result of that. What happens is, it's happening. Keep telling your story, because that's a story that has its own nuance. And as we appreciate it, we are very influential. We've always been influential. You know, the fist bump is much cooler than the high five. So what we do influences, you know, greater populations, and we just have to go ahead now and reinforce by telling our stories. And we would hope that you all would listen, you know, with clarity, and then react how you need to react.
That's a great point. My next book is called Digital Fiction: The Future of Storytelling. So I'm actually working on it now. But the issue for me, and this is, I think, a lot of common ground between what Melek is talking about, is I'm a firm believer in what you call cultural capital. And when you start to think about one of the early modern economists who created the term, this sort of liberal economy, is Adam Smith, who is a moral philosopher. And he has a great phrase where he says, all money is a matter of belief. So he basically was thinking that financial mechanisms and systems are based on perception. So if you perceive market forces going up or going down, you can influence them. So markets are irrational on a lot of levels, but so are people. No one is rational. And the American sensibility is always to go for a reductionist model, black, white, binary, whatever, all these kinds of things that are very simple to digest in baby little bites. I'm a big fan of complexity, and I think that acceptance of complexity allows you to kind of operate in multiple dimensions simultaneously. So the American legacy of the 20th century, sort of reductionist, simplistic, mechanistic kind of model, just is crumbling away. It just can't. I go to China. I mean, speaking of futurism, I've been reading a lot of Chinese science fiction at the moment. There's a great guy, Xixin Liu, who has a good book called The Three-Body Problem. Even Obama put it as one of his favorite books recently. But all his novels are set in the future of Beijing. And, you know, there's a couple of Qin Liu. I'm a huge fan of how the Asian model of science fiction radically changed. Because I'm having people like William Gibson in my book coming up, and some pretty major writers asking them how do they think about the craft of storytelling. And it's about world building. So here we are in the 21st century where, like you were saying, hip-hop, all these different styles of music come out of the African-American experience, techno, dubstep, etc. But there's a culture of appropriation, and I'm a big fan of what you call, you know, mashup and remix culture. So everything can be remixed, including reality itself. I mean, that's kind of my working thesis here. But when you think of a good conversation and a good story, it actually leaves you with this notion of potential. Like, nothing is locked down. The story can go one direction. We can make a new ending. It's a multiple choice, you know, sort of journey here. So these are where conferences like this or gatherings like this, I've been really impressed with just all the different conversations I've had all day. So I just think that right now we're at a pivoting point. We're not quite sure which direction the culture is going, but because of the way the national economy is going, the weed economy or the hemp economy, CBD, et cetera, is really a fascinating space of potential right now. And I think with a tremendous amount of, it can go in a lot of different directions, because in New York, man, all the normal stores are closing. I don't know if anybody's been in Manhattan or Brooklyn recently. There's so many empty stores. The landlords would rather sit on an empty space rather than, and so the volume of empty spaces in New York is growing crazy. I'm sure here because of the tech sector and the housing crisis. But there's a mental housing crisis too. That's my motto these days. It's like we're still sitting on all this empty mental space. You know, like how do we give people a better approach to use what's already there? So I think, as Melek was saying earlier, I am an optimist, and I think that, you know, I'm kind of a glass half full kind of approach. So how do we fill the rest of the glass? So just on a kind of putting this out there, at the end of the day, I feel like the American capitalist model just needs to be reset. Like, we really need to hit the reset button because it's just really not working. And, so that's where this new economy that you all are making is really fascinating to me. So I'm not here to offer answers. I'm just asking questions, and I'm an artist. So for me, this is kind of the art of the conversation. But this gentleman has answers. So I'll just leave it at that.
Let's ReUP.com.
Yeah.
I know I speak on behalf of Melek and Paul when I say that we are so thankful for this great audience. So thank you for your attention, for being here, and for taking to heart what we discussed and maybe putting some of this into action. And also, let's hear it for our fantastic panel, Paul Miller and Melek Dexter.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day. Good evening. We'll see you tomorrow.